Please note that this session is now being recorded. I do also want to just quickly let you know that you do have the Q&A button available to you all. So if you have any questions, we will definitely leave time towards the end to get to those. I recommend that you drop those in the Q&A button under your participant controls. Please know that although we will keep an eye on the chat, sometimes it might get a little difficult to select the questions out of that. So if you can, please use the Q&A. I think we can go ahead and get started. And I wanted to just quickly get started with introducing you to the internship team at CHCI. You'll be hearing from both Dennis Gonzalez, our Director of Leadership Programs, and John Carlos Barrera, our College Program Specialist. Together, we make sure we can provide our participants the best possible learning experience. The work we do and the reason we do what we do is really for CHCI's young leaders, and we're here as a resource for folks going through our application process, as well as going through our program. So you'll be able to hear from all of us in just a minute. So before we get into the details about our program, I want to give a quick introduction to CHCI and the program itself. So the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute should not be confused with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus itself. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that was established in 1978 by Latino members of Congress who wanted to see more representation in Congress and wanted to help develop the next generation of Latino leaders. So we offer educational and leadership development programs for high school students, undergrads, and graduates that promote growth as young professionals and as leaders. As you can see here, we first started with a fellowship program in 1986, and then we were able to expand and grow in 1978, we started with our fellowship. In 1986, we were able to establish our summer internship program, and it was solely for the summers. In 2010 was when we began our year-round internship programs. So now we're able to provide congressional internships for the spring, the summer, and the fall. And I do want to highlight that the alumni of our programs are leading in all sectors, not just in Congress and not just in Washington, D.C. But we do think it important for folks to understand how policy is made, how the legislative process works, because it affects all of us, whether we work in government or not, which is why we think our programs are so critical and such a valuable resource for young Latinos across the country. So today, what we're going to talk about is more specifically our Congressional Internship Program. So, a few details. Handing it over to John.
Thank you, Sasha. Good evening, everyone from my coast, the East Coast. So let's get right into it. The Congressional Internship Program provides college students of any major with a paid placement in a congressional office. And I think one of the major things to highlight is also the fact that it is a very much unmatched leadership training. On top of the fact that you would be placed in a congressional office, there is an emphasis on your professional development. Going back to our organization's mission of developing the next generation of Latino leaders, I think it's really important to highlight the educational aspect of it that also is paired up with the community service. So in a nutshell, I would even describe it as being us focusing on a more holistic internship experience, and instead of what you would always traditionally hear of what an internship experience might look like. You know, going and staying away from an intern getting coffee and now going into, okay, so let's see how we can develop you from beginning to end to make sure the person that you start with us isn't the person that ends the program, right? And that leads me to our 2021 sessions. So here you see the three beautiful sessions, the spring, summer, and fall. The one that's coming up is the spring 2021, and the dates that you see here are the dates of the actual program. So these are the commitments timeframes that you would be looking at. And I think it's really important to note that, you know, since the spring is the first one, it's also The deadline is also 22 days away as of today. So just shy of just 3 weeks. So I think it's really important to stress that out, and that all deadlines are set for an 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And to touch on the 24/7 help desk not being available, just emphasizing here that essentially for folks to get, what we want to highlight is so that folks understand our application is not really something that is ideal to leave at the very last minute. And to also understand that if you do decide to leave it at the last minute, you have to understand that there won't be staff available in those late on the 11th hour to handle any of the concerns that you might have. And so just highlighting, keeping your concerns, between office hours, obviously, but also highlighting the fact that there is that deadline at 11:59 for all of the application deadline dates that you see here. So going into our summer, so that's June 1st to August 6th, and for our fall, August 30th to November 19th. And last point that I would definitely highlight is so that folks understand that it's not really a rolling application. One thing to always note for us and our programs that you can expect some type of decision or hearing back from us within 6 to 8 weeks after the application deadline. So that's always something to keep in mind.
Great. Thanks, John. And John is actually going to walk us through the application process in a few minutes. So for folks that might have questions. All right, on to compensation and benefits. So John already mentioned that it's not so much a traditional program where you just go intern in an office and that's it. We definitely focus on an educational aspect and a personal and professional development aspect as well. But in addition to all of that, we also provide a number of benefits. We of course place our interns in the congressional office to provide that real life experience. So this is something that CHCI takes care of. So we don't send our interns out to look for their own placements. CHCI facilitates that. This is also a paid opportunity. We provide our participants a biweekly stipend so that they're able to take care of their needs while they're interning. And the amounts do range depending on the session. So since the fall and the spring sessions are 12 weeks, the gross stipend amount is $3,750, so $3,750 for fall and spring, and then it's $3,125 for summer. So since summer is a little bit shorter, that stipend amount is a little less. We also provide round trip travel to and from DC. So for folks that are out on the West Coast, we're able to provide flights to and from DC. Generally, folks in the East Coast, sometimes it's a little bit easier to provide an Amtrak or a train ride or something of that sort, and we're able to support in that sense. In addition to that, once our participants do get to DC, we're able to provide an additional monthly Metro stipend. So the Metro is what our interns and really folks that live in DC use to get to and from work and just around the DC area. So we provide an additional Metro stipend for folks to use on top of the biweekly stipend that they receive. We also provide health coverage at no cost to our participants. We understand that some participants usually come in with some sort of health coverage, either from parents or from schools, but we want to ensure that they're covered while they're in DC, and sometimes other plans don't do that. So we do provide that health coverage, once again, at no cost to our participants. And a really important one is that we also provide furnished housing, so participants don't need to worry about finding somewhere to live, somewhere to stay while they're interning, or about paying rent. CHCI is able to provide that as well. And our program can provide academic credit for the internship itself. But this is something that students have to look into themselves, since every institution will have different requirements. Usually what happens is that participants talk to their counselors or their schools and are able to work something out, where CHCI just has to sign off on documentation or provide evaluations or confirmation that they are in fact participating in the program. So this is something that students would have to take on themselves to look into, but we definitely have several participants throughout the year who receive credit for interning with us, since it is essentially a full-time commitment. And of course, we have our leadership and professional development training, which is very, very big component of our program. And one of the things that also comes out and is a huge benefit for our program participants is the network itself. It's the DC network that they get to have access to. It's the cohort that they build, because we do have a cohort model for every session. And so they build a connection with each other, but they also get introduced to the larger CHCI alumni network, which has over 4,000 alums all across the country. I think they're starting to say all across the world now, working in all sectors and at all levels in all fields. So really, these are just a few added bonuses to that congressional experience. And we also quickly wanted to touch on just the general duties or responsibilities of a congressional intern, just so folks know what they're actually applying for. And unfortunately, we can't say too much about what those are, because they vary depending on the offices that they're interning with and the office's needs. So responsibilities for a congressional intern will vary. So interns might be in an office that provides them a wide variety of tasks that they're able to take on. And some offices actually have a little bit more limited range of tasks that they assign to interns, but it really depends on that office. But generally, the tasks for interns that you can expect are around constituent engagement, so answering constituent phone calls, responding to constituent mail, things of that sort. You will be conducting Capitol tours, and there will also be a lot of written correspondence, whether that's responding to those to that constituent mail and drafting letters, or whether that's attending attending briefings and coming back to your offices and writing a memo that you can share. Those are a few of the things that interns do. Once again, just helping with legislative research, lots of research, things like that. So, and interns can have special projects as well. So sometimes it's not so much constituent focused. They can take on special projects outside of that. And what I'll also highlight is that interns will not, for full transparency, be writing legislation or working side by side, meeting with the member of Congress. So just so our program participants know that that's not something that they should expect. The work interns normally do is directly supervised and assigned by a staffer from that office. So most of the communication, most of the work is provided, and the folks that you connect with the most in a congressional internship are with the other staffers from the office.
So program requirements. So we wanted to make sure that we also cover what does it mean to participate in a program. So the program is comprised of several parts. So besides working on Capitol Hill, that's only 4 days a week. So the other day a week, because this is a full-time program, you're expected to attend a lot of different other components. So one of them is the first week you'll participate in an orientation week. And during that orientation week, we slam interns with a lot of information. There's a lot of meetings, meeting with the Congressional Management Foundation, meeting with the Congressional Research Service. So there's a lot of different things to prepare interns for their first week in the office before they go in and intern in their offices. We also have weekly leadership programming on Monday, which is professional development. So the first piece to that is we work with the George Washington University, with the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and the Cisneros program to develop a seminar, a graduate seminar, to have conversations about what's going on in politics. That's also followed by an afternoon. What we'll do is we'll mirror those conversations with different speakers and different Latino leaders to come and have conversations with the interns about what they need to do in order to prepare themselves professionally, regardless if they want to stay in DC or if they want to move on to professions somewhere else. Again, the intern work in their offices is at a minimum of 32 hours a week, which is 4 days a week. And then 1 day a week is working with us at CHCI's headquarters. But that's at minimum. So at minimum, interns are expected to commit 40 hours a week to CHCI because there are other commitments. So we expect all participants to participate in CHCI sponsored activities. So for fall interns, what does that mean? So for the fall interns is participating in our gala and our conference and attending the different functions for that. For the summer, that means participating in the Tri-Caucus reception with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and with APACS, which is our Asian American counterpart as well. Or for the spring is also participating in our different mini conferences, which are basically our policy specific meetings that we have or conferences that we host here at CHCI. So we have those specific summits that we put together that our interns will participate in those things. They also, all interns are expected to complete a certain number of community service hours a week or throughout their participation, are expected to complete a certain number of community service hours. And the purpose for that is that we want to make sure that for those folks who come to DC can also contribute back to that community, like you're learning from this community, but we also want you to provide some support to the community, the local community here in DC. And the last piece is making sure that you comply with all of CHCI's policies regarding work performance and personal conduct. So there's a lot of rules. When you come to CHCI, you're an employee of CHCI, so you're not just interning, you're essentially an employee, so you want to make sure that you're following all HR guidelines while you're here. And also, when you're here, it's a reflection of yourself, your community, your institution. So you want to make sure, and of CHCI when you're in your office, so want to make sure that all of those things are balanced when you're having your experience here. And so eligibility requirements. So I'm just going to, it's a lot of text, so I'm just going to quickly plow through some of these things that are really important. So the eligibility requirements for folks is that we would like a high academic achievement for participants, but don't think of that. If you don't have exactly a 3.0, don't let that limit you. If you want to apply, apply regardless of GPA, but preference is given to higher academic achievement, just so that you're aware of that. That you provide evidence of leadership skills and potential leadership growth, demonstrating commitment to public service and public service oriented activities, showing super analytical writing skills, outstanding oral and written communication, and that'll come through your essays, and John will talk about that a little bit more, but also interview, that's also part of the program. So the other piece, the recent change, is that students must currently be enrolled full-time. That's still continued. However, we have extended the CHCI program to recent graduates. So what does that mean? So we've extended the program to recent graduates who graduated in the term immediately prior to the program. So for spring 2021, you must be a full-time student now, but if you are graduating fall of 2020, you are still eligible for spring of 2021. Or if you're applying for summer, if you're graduating in May or June of 2021, you can still apply for that session. Or fall, because fall we don't require students to go to school during the summer. You can either graduate in the summer or in the spring. So as long as you are a full-time student during one of those sessions or a full-time student before that, even if you're not graduating, we require that that you're a full-time student before those sessions. COVID has thrown in a new wrinkle, which we are willing to connect with folks on a case-by-case basis, but depending on the folks' situation. But we are allowing folks who have taken some time in this current period off to still apply for periods in 2021 due to COVID, just for awareness. And then again, applicants must be U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, asylees, or individuals with lawful authorization to work in the United States. So you can work in the United States. And this includes DACA recipients. International students on an F1 or M1 visa are not eligible for the program. So if you are trying to apply through OPT to work, that is not sufficient to participate in CHCI programs. So once again, DACA is, as long as you have work authorization that goes through the end of the program, you can work, you can apply for the program.
And I'll just add on that if you need to reference this somewhere, you can also find this on our website under the Congressional Internship Program. So eligibility.
So going into our requirements for the application. So an updated resume for sure. Going back to, the eligibility, this is where we want to see you highlight those leadership roles. If you were a student body president, you were a president for your chapter for an organization, what may have you, all of those great things. We want you to highlight your community service, really highlighting you being like a servant leader, essentially. And going into your essays, these are 3 short essays that, highlight where, your understanding of the Latino, Latinx community, getting to see how you think about the issues that are impacting the community, but also getting a chance to share your own story and getting a chance to share your own interests and getting to see how that aligns with the work with our own program. And then that gets me into the letter of recommendation. And this is a piece that, in my personal opinion, I think it really does, it's a hit or a miss. This is something, if you've never, for the folks attending the webinar today, if you have never asked an individual for a letter of recommendation, I think one of the major things to just be aware of is, who is your recommender? Ideally, you might have been in a position where you got to meet, the president, the CEO, or the head of an organization, and you might have felt like, oh, because of their title or because of what may have you, these things make me think that, oh, okay, this would be an ideal person. But unfortunately, you briefly met this person throughout whatever you did for this organization, but the low-level staff member can speak a little bit more to your character. And I want to highlight for that for all our attendees tonight, for them to just pretty much understand that it's more ideal to have someone that can speak to your character, give full blown out like examples, and can give me more than just reiterating your resume, which is at a point subpar. But if we're here talking about what makes a candidate stand out, it's that extra oomph that I feel like can only be found from someone that knows of you and knows of your character, knows of your work, and can adequately put it in. And then that transitions to the official transcripts. Just to clarify, for the application itself, you are open. We do recognize that official transcripts for some institutions might come with a financial burden. So we just want to preface that you can submit unofficial transcripts for the application, but if selected, just be aware that official transcripts would be required for for your onboarding process. And then transitioning to your FAFSA 2020 and 2021 Student Aid Report, SAR. So for folks who might not know, because when I was working for my university, I noticed that a lot of students might not know what their SAR might be, but this is a document that is populated once you've submitted your FAFSA, and this pretty much gives an individual a breakdown of what you submitted, as well as your estimated family contribution, as well as the aid that you would be receiving. And so that's what we're referring to for folks that in this webinar that might not have a FAFSA or a FAFSA student aid report. Just know that your parents or guardians W-2s are sufficient to replace that. And if folks in this call have other situations where they might not, be eligible for FAFSA, or they go through another form of financial aid support, like the GI Bill, for example, then obviously those are things that can be submitted as well as a replacement, just to clarify. Next slide. So breaking it down to the process. So first things first, it's on you, as obviously to submit, but it's also something that we also want to highlight is your recommender, and making sure on top of always asking for a letter of recommendation as much as in advance for your recommender, but it's also important to highlight that for some folks, they might have their application submitted, but their recommender has not submitted. And unfortunately, that's not a full, complete application. So we just want to highlight and give you a quick tip. Submit early. If you recall earlier, I did mention, as of today, we are 22 days out before our October 1st deadline. So for folks in the webinar that are interested in the spring 2021 session, our personal recommendation is always to submit early, but always contact that recommender in advance. Obviously, they'll receive an email saying that, hey, you've been identified as a recommender, but it's always important to make sure you just follow up, as well as while the deadline is, fast approaching. And just so you're aware how our rounds pretty much work, going into our application review, and that's, and that's after the deadlines, going back to the fact that it's not a rolling application. And that's our first segment. And so once we go into the second, you'll go in and you'll be identified as like, hey, you've been selected to go to the next round. This is a video interview. I do want to clarify that this is those on-demand video interviews. So this is where we provide you a link. It's a prompt, you record yourself, and then you submit that video recording. And that's your final and official video interview. And from that is when whether or not you'll hear the final decision of selection or denial. And in a nutshell, that is the process.
And I just want to add on to John's point about submit early and contact your recommender early. We are working with technology. We have an application system, and issues may come up. So you want to make sure that you work out those kinks before the deadline. So as John was mentioning earlier, don't wait until that very last minute, very last hour to try to submit, because we do run into issues. Of course, you all may have already applied for schools if you're undergraduates, and they recommend that you submit early because sites can crash. We're working with technology. It is not perfect, and we may run into issues where your recommender might not be able to submit on time, or you might not be able to submit on time. So just to be safe, submit as early as possible. And once again, I personally encourage you all to apply to all of the sessions if possible, only because John was mentioning that we review applications after the application deadline has passed. So we review by candidate pools. So being, once again, fully transparent, fully honest, we receive hundreds and hundreds of applications for the summer session. So it does get a little bit more competitive, whereas the candidate pool might be a little bit smaller for the fall and spring sessions. So I would encourage folks to apply to all of the sessions, and you kind of get a fresh start with each application that you submit, and your application is considered for that new session within that candidate pool. So I would recommend that folks apply to more than one session if possible and if eligible. And I know the next part is actually actually the most exciting part, because you get to hear from somebody that actually went through all of this from start to finish. But I just want to address a question that folks might have about whether our programs are virtual or if they're in person. Somebody actually did already ask about the winter internship, if that is going to be virtual. And please know that at this time, we do have the current status of our program is that we are going to be moving forward in person. But should that change, we would communicate that to folks before they go on to the interview round. So as of right now, yes, we're doing in person. It is not going to be virtual. But if that changes, we would let people know before they carry on with interviews. All right, so I know some questions are coming in, but I do want to turn it over to John, who will be having a little chat with Marsha.
Thank you, Sasha. Yes, so transitioning to our Q&A with Marsha. So as you see here, Marsha is actually a fall 2019 alumna from her hometown of San Antonio, and she's currently studying over at Howard with her major of Administration of Justice. And when she was here in fall 19, she was placed in the office of Representative Veronica Escobar. So please welcome Marsha with me. Thank you so much for coming in. Marsha, I think one of the major, going back to my point earlier in the in tonight's session, I mentioned how a lot of our students are not the same once they come in and come out of our program. And so I would love to ask, for a starting question, how has the internship program assisted you in the way that you show up in spaces?
Thank you guys so much for having me here. Again, my name is Marsha Madrigal. I was a fall 2019 intern. I feel that once I came into CHCI, just because CHCI also, I believe, recruits students that are at a lower socioeconomic status versus students who came from a higher economic background. And when I was at college, I ran into barriers in the sense that most of my peers were from a higher economic class than I was. And being in a space where there was other students who were in college that more or less came from that same socioeconomic status, and seeing them strive for goals that reach beyond the moon, and also just seeing them and their worth ethic kind of gave me more confidence, because I know a lot of us, at least myself and I didn't even know this was a thing until college, imposter syndrome. I felt that coming from a underserved community, the west side of San Antonio, which is, right downtown, I didn't feel initially when I entered school that I knew enough or that I was worth enough to even be in that space. And being in a community such as CHCI and being able to interact with students that more or less came from that same socioeconomic status background gave me the confidence and helped me actually, I think, overcome that imposter syndrome. I know now I'm really quick to answer questions in class and I'm not as anxious anymore, just because my cohort specifically, and also Sasha and Dennis, Mr. John was not there when I was an intern, but I'm sure he would have also been very supportive of my dreams and my beliefs, and also my congressional office. I think just being around their support gave me the confidence, one, to even show up in spaces that I thought I might not have belonged in, and also gave me the confidence to participate more and to use my voice. I feel like I've always had things in the back of my mind, but because of that imposter syndrome, I wasn't always the first one to raise my hand, or I wasn't comfortable sharing something. But after CHCI, specifically with my supportive congressional office members, my supportive cohort, and also the supportive staff here at CHCI, I think it really just helped me with my confidence. And now I feel more comfortable using my voice in various institutions such as education and my workplace.
Right. And going off of to what you just mentioned, you know, going back to whether it's your institution or your workplace, one of the major things that I always keep seeing from our program participants is, you know, getting to see that when we really talk about the holistic experience that the program provides, you know, what would you say a transferable skill or lesson from the program were you actually able to apply into, whether it's your community back at school or in the workplace? What would you say was one of the most impactful lessons that you were like, oh my gosh, I know that this is exactly how I want to move forward?
I think, and I know this, and I've noticed it as soon as it happened, I think I've just become a very good communicator, thinker, and listener. Those three things combined. Just because I don't know about anybody else, but I was not a Twitter literate person before college. And so one of my tasks in my congressional office was to write draft Twitter posts for my congressional member. And that in the beginning made me really anxious because, one, I have no idea how to use Twitter. And
Right.
two, I'm drafting a tweet for a congressional office representative, Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, who is, you know, new in the congressional office, a Latina woman, and she's from Texas. So that just, I had to think more critically about what I was going to say. I know that a lot of people like to use words interchangeably as synonyms, but when I was writing the tweet, I noticed that each word had a different connotation, and I had to be very careful with how I structured my sentences, because I always had to know that, one, I was not writing for myself, I was writing for my representative, and I was also writing, and whatever I wrote was going to reflect on this Congresswoman and CHCI. So I think that it just made me a better communicator in the sense that I was able to carefully choose the words, because I was writing to a variety of people. Like, my audience was very broad, and trying to create sentences and certain structures that weren't going to necessarily offend people but still get the message across, and acknowledging that not everybody thinks the same, and how do I get this message across in the most efficient way. And I feel like listening also, just because in our Monday sessions, at least we still did that on Mondays when we have the CHCI breakout sessions where it's just the CHCI cohort, you get to listen to a bunch of different people and their experiences and your peers. And a lot of people like to listen to respond, but not actually listening to digest and create a actual response that involves critical thinking, analysis, and is genuine. So I feel like being in a cohort where you had to listen to everybody around you and your experiences just also made me a better listener. So listening to my peers, and also a mix of having to write as a, made me a critical thinker. And I work with kids currently. When I ended my CHCI internship, I actually worked at Meridian, which is a public charter school in DC, as a dedicated aide. You guys don't know what a dedicated aide is? It's basically a person who works individually with the student. And so I worked with students who involved in special education. So I worked with a student who had autism. And currently now in Texas, I am also an instructional assistant. I just got recently employed with the school district I graduated from to be an instructional assistant with special education kids. So bringing it back from being a critical thinker and what to say. When you're working with kids, kids take in a lot more than what you might think they do. And they're very sensitive to words, especially given the fact that I'm working with special education kids, people who might have certain behavioral needs and think differently than I do. So it's just kind of made me had an open mind, and also choosing and picking which words I want to use when I'm speaking to specific audiences. I feel like after drafting that one tweet, even though it gave me a lot of anxiety at the beginning, it was very beneficial because now I think it's easier for me to choose and pick which words to say to convey the message I'm trying to convey.
And don't forget, 140 characters or less.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. And so that really, and I love that you share that, because I think one of the many things that folks don't really learn about CHCI until they get here is, you know, the experience of just connecting with other Latino leaders that were selected in the cohort. And I think that's the most beautiful part that makes such long-lasting impact. So going back into fall 19, you know, let's time travel. What would you say throughout those weeks of programming, what was it that you had to start recognizing within yourself that you said, okay, this is what I'm going to have to do to take full advantage of this opportunity? And, you know, and for folks on the webinar, you know, what would you say, Marcia, is something that they can make sure that they're aware of, you know, if selected, like, to have that kind of mindset? What would you say were some of the things, or if one thing that just really made the experience a lot more impactful, but also allowed you to say, okay, I have no regrets. I did everything that was in my list, and it was because I made sure to do X, Y, Z. What would you say that would be?
I believe that my experience was a lot different in comparison to a lot of my peers, just because I do go to Howard University, which is a historically Black college located in DC. So there was some things that I was already aware of in terms of location and how to get around versus my other peers. One thing I do want to stress, even though it's different in my circumstance, is to take advantage of being in the District of Columbia. Not only is there a variety of nationalities, ethnicities, and races here, but there's certain things that you can get in that concentration that you can't get back in San Antonio, per se. Like, I'm actually starting to compare and contrast right now, in the sense that I had access to the capital of my country, and in San Antonio, I don't have access to the capital of my state. So there's certain buildings and certain things you can take advantage of really here being in DC. And also going back, DC is a really expensive place to live, and CHCI providing rent and all of those housing needs is also something to take advantage of. I also did the Next Gen high school program. So the very first time I went to DC was through CHCI. And so after having that experience of being exposed to DC, it was one of the factors that made me want to come back again. So for people who are interested in, I guess, visiting a new place, or maybe they've never left their hometown, I think just traveling and being around a different demographic of people is something to take advantage of, because that's how you grow, by interacting with people who are different from you and who come from different backgrounds. One thing, just being in CHCI, and I guess more or less close in proximity, because I did go to school in DC and it was so close in proximity, but the fact that I was actually in a congressional office and the briefings were happening right downstairs or right upstairs or right across the hall, that was something I really wanted to take advantage of, because even though I went to school in DC, I still wasn't as advantaged as being right in that building. And for people who have never been to DC or don't go to university in DC, I did a recent webinar with people, high schoolers from my district, and telling them that there's multiple ways to learn. And I felt like being in the congressional office, I learned a lot and more efficiently than sometimes I would in class, For instance, something I learned that I don't think I would have ever learned in high school or in my university unless I took that specific class was about asylums. The return to Mexico policy briefing is probably my favorite briefing I've ever attended in my whole life. And so being able to go in and hear from experts, they also did a briefing on the adverse impacts of children when they go through, just with everything going on with ICE and that sort of thing. And I was able to talk to some board certified psychologists, which are at the very top of the chain. And I know that the chances of me getting in contact with a board certified psychologist would not have been very likely if I wasn't already in such close proximity, meaning in the office and sharing that common space with them. And also just being from other cities and being able to go ahead and attend briefings in the Capitol. I know when I was a CHCI intern, we had the whole DACA rally, which is something I would not have been able to take advantage of if I was in San Antonio. So I like to think about what can I do in DC that I might not be able to do in San Antonio, whether that's just living, experiencing different cultures, different foods, having access to certain high, excellent professionals, and being able to see the action live, like right in front of me, is something that I did take full advantage of to the fullest extent, and is something that I feel like has impacted me and has made me a better learner. And I think it's different than reading in a textbook and actually talking to a board certified psychologist or a superintendent of X, Y, and Z school. I just feel like being able to actually talk to them made it so much more real to me. So I feel like those are some things you should really take advantage of when you decide to go ahead and pursue the internship.
I love that. I gotta, and as we start wrapping up, my final question, I love that you ended on that note, because the thing that I wanted to get your last response on was really I think is so beautiful for any internship or just any experience out there. It should show you whether or not this is something you want to pursue. And I think what's so great is, you just share, you essentially you got to see during your time, you got to see parts of history be made and it being figured out in these briefings, in these events, getting to meet important folks. And so I wanted to ask if you can just share, would you say that all of this and all of this in the entirety of this program, would you say it led you to change or have a different perspective or insight for your career path? And if so, what would you say what that was? For a lot of our program participants, it's either this program made them feel like, oh, I could pursue, the public sector, or that the public sector is not for me, and maybe I need to pursue another sector of employment. So I just wanted to get your understanding of, as you're approaching graduation with Howard, what does that look like? Does it still look like the same, or how has that changed? If you can elaborate on that.
Okay. Ever since I was little, I've always had this one common goal, and it was how to figure out how to stop the school to prison pipeline. And initially I thought about becoming a juvenile justice lawyer or becoming a civil rights attorney. And then that kind of transitioned to, well, where is the root of this problem? And I was focusing more on the prison and less on the school. And after going to university and having some time there, I started to focus more on the actual school aspect of the school to prison pipeline, since essentially our youth are getting criminalized at school. And so before entering the CHCI internship specifically, I had already came up in my mind that eventually one day I wanted to start my own public charter school that was going to cater to Black, Latinx, Latino, Latina, Hispanic youth back in my community, because I felt like my school did a great disservice, essentially. And I wanted to create the school that I wish I had when I was, K through 12. And so going into CHCI, I got to see how the congressional office work and how legislature works. And one thing I noticed is that there's a difference between, being an educator and then being a person who writes the laws specifically. Beforehand, I've been working with Latino, Latinx, Latina, Hispanic children for a very long time. Being that San Antonio, I think, is the second largest concentration of Latinx, Latino, Latina, Hispanic population in the country. And I noticed that I liked interacting, like those human interactions when you're in the office and I'm calling constituents. I like those interactions as well. But I noticed that the staffers, which they do interact with people when they do have those meetings, but I really liked interacting with my community more so than writing the laws and not actually seeing the people that it's impacting. I do like the idea of creation. My mother's an artist, so it's been about what can I create that's going to benefit myself and also the people around me. And I feel that going into CHCI, it's kind of made me feel like I like the creation of the laws, but how can I interact with the people that it's impacting also? So right now I'm still trying to figure out how I can get a mixture of both, because I cannot see myself interacting and creating policies that were going to impact people. I wouldn't want to start my school until probably my 30s or 40s. Right now, my minor is community development. And so I thought about maybe being a youth organizer or a community organizer. And so I think that kind of goes hand in hand with the internship, because you're trying to organize people so they can, so a common social interest can benefit them. It's good to know what's going on in the institutions and the politics of it. So I feel like I'm still trying to find that middle ground, but I do feel like that the internship helped a lot with how the institution works and the politics of things. I have that in the back of my mind when I am trying to pursue either creating a school or beforehand becoming a youth organizer or playing a more active role in my community as some type of community organizer.
Thank you for sharing that. So those are the questions that I have for Marcia. I don't know if, Sasha, if we have some time to see if there is any questions that attendees might have.
Yeah, we do have some questions, and I think I do see some questions, and we do want to make sure to cover these. I think there's a question about housing and whether that also includes a meal plan or if interns are responsible for meals.
Cover that. So for housing, housing does not include meals. So housing covers the physical space. We rent furniture, so it's fully furnished housing plus utilities. And to keep in mind that the stipend that you're provided is to cover the things so that you can like live in DC. So that includes food, transportation, to and from work. While you're here for this experience, we want to try to take as many of the things off your plate as possible, but you need to figure out certain things for yourself. But we are covering all the utilities except for the internet. The internet will be, the expectation is that the roommates of the unit of the apartment will get together and coordinate getting internet if you choose to do so. But electricity, water, gas, etc., are covered in your housing.
Yeah. And I'm also sure Marcia can attest to the fact that there are several events that happen on the Hill, off the Hill, that are open and free to folks to attend, and they do have, food. So that's also, that also kind of helps cut costs on the intern side. So the next one that we want to get to, what advice would you give to a business student who has not taken any political science courses, who is looking for a strong recommendation? I can just kind of start us off on that, in the fact that we definitely do want to stress that this internship is open to all majors. And part of the programming that we do in conjunction with us, the George Washington University, the seminar course that we provide during programming, is to provide folks that legislative knowledge and the foundation, because we do acknowledge that we have folks that aren't poli-sci majors that are kind of new to this space, and we want to make sure that everybody kind of starts off at the same level. But in terms of the strong recommendation, you really don't need to have taken any political science courses. I think what we're looking for is to see what your interests are, and somebody who can speak to just who you are as a person, and can speak maybe to like your work ethic, or maybe you've been involved with your community, or you're part of clubs and you've taken on leadership roles. So just people who can talk to your, like John said, your character, so your involvement, things like that, even if they're not politically affiliated. So I hope that answers your question. And there is also another question, because I'm sure this is also top of mind for folks in case that we do have to move to virtual. Someone is asking, what does the virtual internship look like? Anybody wants to take that on? It's essentially, we currently have our fall program going on right now, and it is a virtual internship. So folks are still working remotely for congressional offices, and we're still conducting professional development, leadership development, seminar trainings during the week via Zoom. So those are online trainings. We get together a couple times a week to discuss different issues, cover different topics, things like that. So everything is just kind of online, and the internship component itself is done remotely for congressional offices. So still kind of the same, minus the DC experience, but you still get congressional experience.
I'll answer the next question that's live. So do you have to be part of the Latinx community to apply, or can it be from any background? Any background can apply. Anyone can apply for the program. A lot of the questions that we ask are pertaining to the Latino community and your contribution to the Latino community. Anyone can apply, but the focus of the program is towards uplifting folks in the Latino who are trying to contribute to the Latino community. So a lot of the questions that we ask are focused on contributions to the Latino community. So anyone from any background can apply, but a lot of the programming and focus is on that. There's a question about what chances are there for first-year undergrad that does not have government experience to get accepted into the program? And follow up, what can they do to stand out or have a strong application? So I can also manage that one. So it depends. You have to put together the best application that you possibly can. You have to keep in mind that you are competing against students from all academic levels, first year to fourth year students. And many of them have taken on leadership roles in their communities, in their schools. And that's not to say that first year students cannot get picked, students going into their second year as well. In Marsha's class, there was a second year student who was a first year student, and Marsha was a second year student going into first year. So you had two folks.
I was a first year, me, Andrea, Isa. I think it was like, there was quite a first year student.
Yeah, there were several. So I think that there are opportunities for first year students. You just have to put together a strong application and make a strong case for yourself. The essays are really important. Your letter of support, your letter of recommendation is really important. but your resume is also really important. I would note that summer is extremely competitive. And so you really want to get all of your things aligned, all of your documents, to make sure that you make a strong case. And so that means a lot of the resume stuff that we'll talk about later, but also a lot of the other pieces have to be really strong to be competitive. But there's definitely been folks who have been picked for the program who are first year moving into their second year.
And I'm actually gonna kick it over to Marcia, because I believe this question came in while you were sharing part of your story. How did you manage your time with school and the internship?
Okay. I had to actually attend Howard University before the coronavirus. Didn't have really anything for online classes. So my schedule more or less looked like waking up at 6:30 in the morning every day. And then after my internship, I would literally run to the metro and go to college and do everything at night. For me, I know, especially with the coronavirus and new professors are dealing with technology that they might not have been able to deal with before. But before I started the internship, some of my professors had already sent me syllabuses and things of that sort. And I understand that not all professors do this, but if you are taking a class and the professor is providing you with material, I would try to do everything in advance as much as possible. And I just feel like as long as you keep yourself organized, you should be fine. And I feel like a lot of the things that I learned in the congressional internship also kind of related back to what I was learning in class, just because I am an administration of justice major, which combined criminology and sociology. So when I was attending briefings, I was attending a lot of sociology of education, criminology type briefings. And so that also helped with class. But honestly, just kind of keeping a schedule and a routine. I know for me specifically, even now to this day, if I can find a routine and stick to it, it helps me become less anxious or just calms my anxieties, because I know that I have a thing with timing specifically. And if I feel like I'm running out of time, I'm going to start freaking out. So as long as you can try, I would recommend a routine specifically, and also just to stay hydrated and drink a lot of water and watch what you're putting into your body, because what you're putting in is going to project basically out. And so just to keep that in mind as you're going through the internship, which also kind of goes back with that routine, I would just kind of create a routine and try to stick to it as much as possible. And in the end, I'm just going to say this, even though sometimes I don't follow it, we have to let go of things we can't control, which is one of the things we learned in one of the leadership things. And as long as we can control our reactions to certain events, because sometimes we can't control the events that are happening, but if you can try to control your reaction and try to remain optimistic, I promise you, you will be fine. I definitely had to take 12 hours, and all of them were in person, and I got all A's, and it was because of the routine. And I really had to let go of things I couldn't control. And it was good. We made it work, and it was only a couple months, so it might be like a very stressful or a lot to handle, but it's only for a little bit. So to also keep in mind that this is temporary. So that also kind of helped me when it came to not only actually physically having to go to a congressional office, but also having to physically go to my campus. I know a lot of the other interns had classes as well if it was required, and they did it online. But I really had to be in two places. So I would just recommend the routine specifically.
Yeah.
I do want to flag though,
Yeah.
that Marcia had a special circumstance. Also,
I recommend.
CHCI, and we will communicate this, and she also did this as well, that you must communicate with us and you must get approval for your classwork while you're interning. And we strongly encourage you not to take any classes while you're doing it, because as she said, it can feel like a lot and it can swamp. So we really encourage you to not take any classes, but all classes that are taken, you need to be approved by CHCI while you're here.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to add on the same thing, that this is already a full-time commitment. So you're responsible for, at a minimum, 40 hours of CHCI related work, whether it's in a congressional office, whether it's programming. And on top of that, there is commute, there is networking events. So there's definitely a lot. And that's just to make it easier on folks. We recommend to make sure that you're not taking classes, but as Dennis mentioned, there are special circumstances, and we understand that sometimes you can't just leave school. So, but recommended not to take classes. Next question. I know we're at time, but if folks want to stick around for the Q&A, please do. We have somebody who's asking if a student were accepted for the summer 2021 program, but they're unable to attend, if they would be able to defer to the fall 2021 session. Unfortunately, we don't do that. At this time, we would just, what we can do is that we recommend that you submit an application for the fall program as well. So just make sure that you're applying for the different sessions. We do understand that things come up, but just recommend that you apply for the different sessions.
So the next question is, if someone is transferring to a university, do they submit their community college transcript for the official transcript, since they will be starting at a new university in the fall? Yes, so you want to submit your community college transcript when you're transferring from one institution to the other. It's also helpful to submit the transfer agreement if your institution already has a transfer agreement, or the full, like we will need your transferring information to know the institution that you'll be transferring to. So let's say if you're from California, you're going to Santa Monica College and you got into UCLA and you have a transfer agreement or the transfer, you will need those documents as well, besides your community college transcript. Does having affiliations with Latinx organizations such as HSF and HACU give an advantage to the application? Anything that you put in your application is helpful. I think that regardless of the organization, you should really tailor your resume to the thing that you want to do. So any type of affiliation with any kind of Latino organization would be helpful, be it Alpha, be it SHIP, be it whatever group or organization you're part of, Latino fraternities and sororities. That is also helpful. So whatever you're doing in your institution or whatever groups you are part of, those will be helpful in your resume.
Christian submitted a question about some of the challenges interns frequently face and what resources are provided to help them succeed. I'm also going to pass this over to Marcia. You were with your peers. You heard from the challenges and struggles that they had. You shared some of your own, so I'll just kick it over to you to take that on.
Okay, let's see.
But I know time management is usually one that folks kind of struggle with so much going on.
I think, yeah, just the time management. Honestly, I feel that Sasha and Dennis do a very good job communicating what exactly is going to happen and what exactly is expected. I don't feel like CHCI specifically gave me any more challenges. I do feel like it was a challenge to balance school and the internship, which is not something I would have done if I could keep my scholarship at Howard, to be honest, because that was the issue. But I don't think CHCI ever really created challenges for me. I think what the resources, I think also, which is something I did not take advantage of just because it slipped my mind, but I want to say that they had provided some type of mental health type resources, which I think went along with the insurance. And so I feel like that's a good resource, especially when it comes to dealing with time management and a lot of things. It wasn't my first time going away, far away from home. It might be some of the participants' first time going away from home, and I know that can be very scary. And so when it comes time to looking at your insurance and those types of packages, I would just look more carefully than I did, because I think the biggest resource that you're going to get is Sasha and Dennis, to be completely honest, as well as just the insurance, which covers mental health services, I believe. So other than that, I don't feel like CHCI as an institution or as a set of people specifically made anything harder for me. If anything, they made it easier, because Sasha and Dennis will lead you through this and will be very honest, emphasis on the very honest about what is expected. So I feel like they do a really good job, just the communication and everything. And also, I'm going to emphasize again the routine, but CHCI does not do anything that would challenge you. They're going to try to take off as much of the edge as possible. So.
Yep, we're here to be a resource, and I think that's also one of the reasons we encourage folks to apply to our program, is because we understand that there's a lot of people that come out to DC to do internships and do it on their own, and we're definitely here to be that resource. And your cohort will also be a good resource, because as Marcia mentioned, they're one of the challenges will vary depending on the person. Some people will get very homesick because they've never been away from home, and that's going to be their biggest struggle. And for other people, it might be turning down networking events and opportunities because they just want to go to all the things and meet all the people. But that takes a toll, just like on the body, mentally. Then we run into issues with just like time management and trying to do a lot. And that might be a challenge for some folks. So it definitely varies depending on the person. But we're here to be of support. So thanks, Marcia.
You're welcome. Thank you for all your support.
The next question I'll field, because I started this circle. So for folks applying for the internship, is one term more competitive than the other? So is summer more competitive than other ones? For transparency about this, yes. For specifically for summer, it's far more competitive in terms of sheer number of applications, because basically every cycle you're competing against the people who applied in your cycle, and that's why folks don't move back and forth, because we're selecting a group of folks based on the pool, based on the folks who are applying. And in the summer, just because a lot of folks tend to do their internships solely in the summer, or they're part of engineers and STEM folks who take series, can really only take internships in the summer. We have a larger pool of applicants. So the competition pool is far more competitive, just because there's a lot more people who are applying for very limited amount of spots. That's not to say that fall and spring are not competitive. They're also competitive, but the sheer volume of applications is much higher in the summer. So when you're thinking about looking at this opportunity, are you only looking at it just for summer, and this is just something that you want to do? Or if you're really interested, you should really keep in mind all the different periods of time when you can do the internship. So be it spring or summer or fall. So just wanting to put that out there for folks.
Yep. And the last question that we do have is just about, and I think we've covered some tips around this already, but just what to do in order to stand out as a candidate in the application process. And I'll let folks chime in as well, but I think one of the things that that I like to see is just a better understanding of who you are as a person. Once again, getting to see a little bit of who you are, what your interests are, and just really being honest. And we see this in the resume, and we see this in the in the responses to the essay questions, and also through the interviews, is don't give us answers that you think we want to hear. Really just be open to sharing who you are, what your experiences are, and what has shaped you. Because when we're putting our cohort together and selecting folks, we do want to bring folks from different backgrounds, different experiences, because that's how you learn. You learn most from each other. So really think about what you're putting into your essays, and think about how that connects to what you're showing on your resume, and make sure that we just get a sense of who you are. For example, some folks might write about a specific issue that they're really, really passionate about. Make sure that we also see what has led you to that, and what you plan to do with that. So just, it's very vague, but we really do see it on the application. Like, we do want to see who you are. So it's not just giving us what you think we want to see, but really just who you are. Sorry, that's so big, but that's just what I think.
Just to strongly echo that, yeah, it's really important that you are very sincere about why you want to do this program. Like, it just be honest. I think it's easier for us. Like, we've read hundreds. We were speaking about this earlier. We've read hundreds and hundreds of applications. It's really important for you to not tell us what you think we want to hear, but to really tell us why you care about certain things. If you care about a certain policy, don't just mention immigration because we're a Latino organization and your entire essay is basically a Wikipedia search. If your family if you really care about healthcare reform because your parents lost their jobs and their jobs were tied to their health insurance and they no longer had health insurance, and something came up and then they can't afford healthcare. If that's part of who you are and that's what drives you, then share those things. Or student loan debt and that you can't afford to go to college, or people had to drop out. Those are honest and serious issues, and all issues are Latino issues, as many of one of the organizations I used to work at used to say. Talk about those issues that impact the Latino community, but also impact you. And that's what we really, because we want to get a very diverse set of folks, and diverse in terms of the things that care about the issues that are important to them. So really focus on that. I think that really makes an application stand out. But I'm also sharing in the chat with everyone a plug for, and we'll do this at the end, is this is the first part of our webinar series, where we're going to give folks more information and more support in terms of how to strengthen their applications, but not just for CHCI, but for any internship, fellowship, graduate school. A lot of the advice that we're going to share in these will be helpful for those applications as well.
Yeah, and just to quickly add on a little bit more like practical tips, make sure you proofread your essays and your resumes. If you need a second set of eyes to look at them and just catch mistakes you just can't see anymore because you've been rereading your essay, please get a second pair of eyes on it, and make sure there's proper grammar and punctuation, all of that. That's helpful. And another tip that I want to make sure to provide is that encourage you to submit your resume and your documents in a PDF form, only because once you upload and then we re-download your resume formatting might change, things might shift, and then it might make it more difficult for us to actually try to read that resume. So make sure you PDF. All right. So I will say, Marsha has shared her Instagram in case you do have questions. If you do have any questions just about the application, you run into issues, you can go ahead and reach out to us via email. You can send questions or anything to programs@chci.org. I'm typing that in here now. So you can reach out to us there. Definitely encourage you all to apply to the spring internship program if you're eligible. We do have a series that we're putting together. As Dennis mentioned, it's the next one is happening Wednesday, September 23rd. Same time, 8 p.m. Eastern time. It's going to be resume pointers. As Dennis already mentioned, that this is something that we're putting together to provide folks an opportunity to strengthen their skills, strengthen their resumes, get more information for any program that you might be interested in applying to. And hopefully that includes CHCI's programs as well. So like I said, if you do have any questions, make sure to follow CHCI on our social media channels. We'll be sharing information about the next webinars that we do have coming down the line. Dennis threw in the link on there, so feel free to check those out. I believe we'll be adding more as we move along. So just keep in touch with CHCI, follow us, and if you have any questions, programs at CHCI. I believe that's it. Thank you so much for joining us. Reach out to us if you do have any other questions or concerns. We're, like we said, we're here to be of support. Thank you. So good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Let's see.
Thanks, Marsha.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm always here to volunteer.